actually filming this for the second time because my camera completely crashed and erased all of my data from when I was previously filming it, so that's really fun. Totally pleased with my camera right now. But anyway, that's fine. On with the video. Hi guys, my name is Kirsty and welcome to Upside Down Books. Today we're going to be talking about The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon and whether or not I think it is worth reading and whether you guys are going to read it, whether I think you should read it, and the good and the bad from it. So I want to first start with having a look at the stats and details about the book itself. Priory of the Orange Tree is a very long book, and in its hardback edition it clocks in at 827 pages long, but in a lot of the other editions it is even longer, creeping towards the 900 page mark. It is written by a British author, Samantha Shannon, and was published this year along with the audiobook version in February of 2019. The publisher of the book was Bloomsbury. Over on Goodreads, it's been doing quite well. It's had over 6,300 ratings, and it is coming in at 4.23 stars out of 5 for its average rating, which is actually pretty high, but I would definitely have expected this book to have more ratings and more people having read it, but I guess because of its size, a lot of people have been put off. It does classify as an adult epic fantasy novel. It is not YA, it's got some pretty adult stuff happening in it. The audiobook itself was narrated by Leah Summers, who is a fantastic narrator. She did all sorts of voices and accents for different characters who came from different areas within the kingdom or within the land, which really helped to diversify the book and give the characters a real unique sense of identity, and I think it really sort of broadened and gave more depth to the story itself. It was definitely an enjoyable book to experience via audiobook. However, if I could go back in time, I probably would read it, just because rereading passages where I got confused probably would have been really helpful, but we'll discuss that in a little bit. The audiobook is 25 hours and 52 minutes long, so it is quite a long audiobook considering that I think on average you could say a standard book would be about 9 to 12 hours long, unless it's Outlander, in which they are over 50 hours, but those books are ridiculous. So 26 hours is pretty long, but it is not unachievable. It was published exclusively by Audible, I believe, so I don't think you could get it anywhere else as of yet, or perhaps now that we're several months away from publication you can, and on there it has a rating of 4.3 stars on average, so ever so slightly higher than Goodreads, but that's only on the average of 41 ratings. Samantha Shannon herself is an experienced author, having had some success with her previous series, which is still ongoing, The Bone Season, which is a New York Times bestseller. That series is going to be 7 books long. I think we have 3 out of 7 so far. I haven't personally read them, so this is my first time experiencing her writing, and she's definitely really talented, but I will still get into issues I have with the book in a little bit. Samantha Shannon is a British author, and she studied at one of the colleges at Oxford studying literature, and her work has since been translated into 26 different languages. So my personal rating for this book was 3 out of 5 stars. It started at 3.5 and then I changed my mind after I finished a couple of other books, or one other book after it, which was The Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons, and I feel like that book just gave me some perspective on how I felt that The Priory of the Orange Tree didn't really pack the punch that I was expecting. So that's sort of the behind the scenes of the book, so I'm going to move on to now what it's actually about and then have a look at the good and the bad, and I'm probably going to start with the bad first so that we can finish on a good note so that I don't put too many of you off. So this book is set in a land where there are about 4 different kingdoms, areas, realms, regions, whatever you want to call them, and they don't talk to each other at all. 1,000 years ago there was an event where this big fire-breathing dragon, whose name I cannot remember, came and just ravaged the lands, and with the power of the Berethnet Queen, who lives in Virtudum, which is one of the areas that we follow, she managed to, I want to say slay the beast, but she basically imprisoned him for 1,000 years in a slumber beneath a mountain. I don't really know where he was, but he's been out of action for 1,000 years, so there's then been this sort of prophecy that when that 1,000 years is up, he will rise again and these dragons will come out and destroy the world. A bit of an Armageddon story. So a lot of the story is building up to this. We're at this 1,000 year mark now, so we're trying to work out what's going to happen, who's going to do what, and all of the religious beliefs and prophecies are just clashing against each other and causing so many arguments. So we have 4 characters that we follow, I believe. So we've got Aed, Tanae, Niclais, and Loth, and I wasn't a big fan of Niclais at all. I didn't really follow, I can't really remember what Loth did, but Aed and Sabran were by far the best, and I think they really carried the story for me. It's very much so a feminist-driven epic fantasy, so that was really cool to read. There is LGBT representation, we have a leading female-female relationship in it, and there's so much diversity when it comes to race, ethnicity, even though it's a fantasy novel. There are also a lot of dragons, and that was wonderful. So we have the bad dragons, which are fire breathing, we have the good dragons, which are water spouting, and then we have worms as well, but they're not like worms, they're like lizardy dragons? I don't know. So we rotate between these 4 perspectives and we get to see a lot of the land. We get to just build up to this plot of what feels like the character is going to come together to fight off this evil. So because of belief differences, a supposed plague in one of the areas, and other things, they have walled each other off and they're not interested in talking to each other. So it's a lot of heavy politics sort of going on as to the relationships between the areas. Queen Sabran being, I would say, the most important perspective in this one. She is Queen Sabran the Ninth in a long line of queens. So it is a queendom, virtuedom is a queendom, and the queen must, like, it is her duty to marry and sire, that's not the right word, and give birth to a daughter who will be the next queen. They always only have daughters, and I think they've always only had one, but Sabran is obsessed, I guess, with not doing that, and she's looking at ways to become immortal so that she can avoid getting married, because she really doesn't want to be involved with a man at all, which is totally fair, but slightly problematic when you're a queen. Iad is in the castle as well, in the palace, wherever they are, and she is a handmaiden to Queen Sabran, but she's also an undercover agent essentially for the Priory. So the Priory of the Orange Tree is a religion slash cult of mages. So the Priory is where the title comes from, and there is literally an orange tree that bears fruit, and if you eat the fruit and are worthy, then you can get magic powers. Loth is Queen Sabran's best friend, and he has been sent away and goes on various sorts of adventures. It's not really an exile because they're worried that he's going to interfere with marriage setups and proposals for Queen Sabran. I didn't really grasp at the beginning what had happened there, and I think because I was reading the audiobook and I just assumed that if I just carried forwards it would all make sense, but it didn't. So if you don't get it from the beginning, try and solidify it in your head and read back over it, because otherwise you're just confused for the rest of the story. The other character that we have is Niclaise, who I thought was Miclaise, but it's Niclaise, and he's an alchemist and an anatomist, and I really didn't like him. He was my least favourite character in this book. Found his chapters so boring, and I could not care less if he had been in the story or not been in the story. He really didn't bring anything to it. In fact, I can't even remember why he was relevant. So it is this sort of sweeping tale as we go around all of the nations in following a lot of different characters, with there being quite a few minor ones thrown in there as well, all with their own beliefs and ideas of how they will defeat the Nameless One, that is what he's called. So the Berethnet line of queens, which is what Sabran is, Sabran Berethnet, they believe that as long as there is a Berethnet on the throne, that they are, I suppose, God-given, in that they will be protected from the Nameless One, and that the Nameless One cannot rise as long as there is someone on the throne from the Berethnet line, which is the added pressure to Sabran herself to have a daughter because she is securing the safety of the kingdom. We have other characters that come from different nations that believe the only way to defeat him is to unite the 4 nations together and use their combined forces to either kill him or trap him for another 1,000 years. And then we have the mages, the people from the Priory of the Orange Tree, who believe that they can defeat him with magic. It's one of those stories that's sort of unsettling, trying to work out who's right, because I think at the essence of it all, as a reader, you're questioning whether any of them are right, any of them are going to be able to do it, and with everyone being so pig-headed in believing their way is the only way, it's very confusing trying to see where the book is actually going. So the things that I didn't like about this book was Niclaise, because he didn't bring much to the story. He was a really boring character, and I just didn't really care for his chapters, and I think a lot of that simply comes from the fact that I didn't really understand who he was, how he was connected, and was so confused for so much of this book what he was trying to achieve. He is in exile, and we get to encounter pirates through him and all sorts of things. I do remember how he's connected. He was supposed to brew a potion of an elixir of immortality for Sabran so that she would never die and therefore never have to have a daughter. And he doesn't do it, so he embarrasses her, and that's why he's in exile. So for this whole time he is determined to prove his worth by figuring out the recipe and the key to unlocking the elixir of life, and it's just really boring and uninspiring, and he's just sort of a bad guy who's really weak. He's not a good villain, he's just this limp noodle of a character that the book could have just killed off and been 100, 200 pages shorter for it, in my opinion. But I think the real clincher for this book was the ending, and I'm not going to give any spoilers. I just don't think the ending was befitting of such an epic novel. The novel is brilliant and I loved reading it. I loved dipping into the story when it wasn't Niclay's chapters and going to all these places with the characters. But by the time you get to the ending, it felt very rushed, very sudden, and whilst it was spectacular, it wasn't as grand as I think it needed to have been. I actually think I would have been much happier if this book had been part of a trilogy or even just a duology, just to sort of flesh out that ending. It almost felt like Samantha Shannon had written so much and spent so much time and then just felt that she needed to wrap it up, so she just tied a quick knot. The other thing was I don't think the audiobook is necessarily the best version for initially reading it, or perhaps you just need to give it 100% of your attention, because I read my audiobooks when I work, when I drive, when I'm doing other things. Unless it is a very mindless task like painting, then I would get distracted for a moment and miss crucial things out that lead me to not liking narrative lines such as Niclay's entire story. I really think that my dislike of this book is mostly my own fault. So many people love it that I would definitely say I think that you should try reading it if you are interested in reading it, but don't bother if you're just gonna read it for the hype. The good things about this book were numerous and amazing. The fact that we have so many leading female characters was so great for an epic fantasy, because that never happens. Nobody writes a feminist epic fantasy. It just doesn't happen. Very often, anyway. Iad and Sabran were such strong characters, and I thought the fact that we had a leading female-female relationship throughout the book was really cool. It wasn't my favourite relationship. I didn't 100% buy into it. It didn't feel 100% natural. I really enjoyed the magic and the fact that not everyone had magic, but it wasn't just people being born or gifted with it. There was specific training, religious beliefs, and other history behind who had magic and what they did with it. I thought the Priory was really interesting. I was expecting to spend way more time in the book actually at the Priory, but for the most part it's very surface level what we find out, and I was so happily read a novella or a spin-off that was about the setup in there itself. The Dragon Riders were of course one of my favourites. I love dragons and I thought the Dragon Riders section were great. So Tane is a trained or dragon rider in training, and the connection that they get with their dragons was really cool. So the dragons that they ride are water dragons opposed to the fire-breathing ones, who are the bad ones. And they get a lot of a bad rap from the other nations because the other nations just see dragon rather than the fact that they're water dragons and think that they are consorting with the enemy, so to speak. So I liked all those added details that made it a little bit more complex, and that was really fun. Loth himself was a character I came into liking more towards the end of the story. I got a little bit confused at the beginning because I kept mixing him and Niclay's up in my mind and couldn't get their stories straight, but in the end I thought it was really cool, and he had some really key roles to play, so I'm almost sad that he wasn't in the story more and that we didn't get more screen time with him and Sabran together, because we get almost nothing and they seem to have a really good thing going. I also like that there is a little bit of a mystery going on here, because there are some really shady things happening in Virtudom surrounding Queen Sabran, and I liked that is just slowly fleshed out over the whole book. And I think in all honesty we could have just taken Niclay's out of the story and just left this as a mystery epic feminist fantasy between Iad and Sabran, and it would have been incredible. But I also think we would have lost a bit of breadth of the plot, so, because I did really like the pirates, and the pirates come into Niclay's story. It was really cool just throwing pirates into a dragon story, like such a mesh of genres happening there. But I think those are my main thoughts about this book. I'm very much so wishy-washy and on the fence about it, but I would stand by what I said before, that if you think that this is something for you, going by off the blurb and what it sounds like, then definitely read it. My negative thoughts are so much so my own fault. So this book is big and long, but doesn't take too long to read. I felt like I really enjoyed my time within the story. I was sad that it ended. I wish there was more, so I would recommend this book, but please just take your time with it. So that is all that I have for you today. So let me know down in the comments below if you've read this book and your thoughts of it, and I will speak to you in my next video. Goodbye.